is a very dynamic young man who has come to here. He's a member of the Democratic Women's Club of Florida Speakers Bureau, so he goes around the state speaking to women's clubs and other organizations. And I think you will enjoy him immensely. He's running for city council, is it?
We call it city commission, but it's the same thing as city council.
Of Largo.
Yay.
So he's come down here to spend his time. So I introduce Mr. Aaron Darr.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can everyone hear me without the microphone if I'm this loud, or should I use it? Do I need it? Should I use it? Okay. So, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I love that when I first walked into this room, it's very clear that there are some Democrats here. I love it. I was joking with my partner that Clint Eastwood might have actually helped set up the room today because, we have also Barack Obama here, but if you ask Clint Eastwood, Barack Obama also might be sitting here in the empty chair. If you remember that correctly.
Yes, I do.
Of course, I love that because, of course, we re-elected Barack Obama. So take that, Clint Eastwood. But I am very happy to be here with all of you today. As she was saying, my name is Aaron Darr, and I am on the Bureau of Speakers of the Democratic Women's Club of Florida. And in doing so, I travel across the entire state. Just in the past 8 days, my gosh, I've been everywhere. I've been in Palm Beach County, which isn't too far from here, of course, then Broward County. I live in Pinellas County, which is about 2.5 hours from here. It was fun. I've been up since 5 o'clock this morning, bright and early. So I've been in Palm Beach County, Broward County. I was just this week, I was also in Osceola County, Orange County, and Pasco County, and Hillsborough County. So I go all over the place, and I love it. On Monday, I'm going to be in the villages. Yes, the villages. Oh, I'm going into red territory. But I will tell you, it's interesting. We can call it blue, we can call it red. There are over 17,000 registered Democrats in the villages.
Wow.
A lot of people don't know that, but there are. There are. And we have to turn out every single vote that we can in 2016 because I remind you, especially if the Republicans, decide not to nominate Donald Trump, and please do, I can't wait. Can you imagine he and hopefully Hillary in a debate together? My gosh. But, if they are smart enough to nominate somebody like Jeb Bush, we have to remember the number 537. I say that all the time. I was just speaking with a group of seniors in Hudson, Florida 2 days ago. 537. 537 individuals that had they turned out and voted, we would have changed the course of the United States and the world forever. We might not have had a September 11th. We might not have had an Afghanistan and Iraq. So many of the policies and the ideas that were set forth, but by who else? The Bush administration. And if you ask me, even though I'm here today to talk about HIV/AIDS, I kind of see a pattern here. It takes a Clinton to clean up after a Bush. And wouldn't you all like to see a woman president? Because that's what I like to see. So, of course, I'm on the Bureau of Speakers of the Democratic Women's Club of Florida. In addition to that, my background, you're going to hear a lot of the name drop of the Clinton today because that's kind of my background. When I was 16, I'm 17 now, I'm 17. When I was 16, Hillary Clinton ran for president. That was the first time I ever really got involved in politics. Always kind of had a thing for the Clintons a little bit because I grew up in Canal Fulton, Ohio, and the school that I went to was in Clinton, Ohio. It was also called Clinton Elementary. So for some reason, I've always had this fascination with her husband, Bill. And of course, that was the first time that I really got intrigued and interested in politics. And I mean, how could you not as a young person after you have 8 years of an administration that had undone so much of the good work of a Democratic administration under President Bill Clinton, that we were in very, dire need of ensuring that we elected another Democrat as president, and of course we did with Barack Obama. So that was the first time I ever really got involved in politics. Graduated from high school in Ohio, moved to New York City, and we started working with Bill Clinton and Chelsea Clinton at the Clinton Foundation, even during the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy, which devastated New York State and areas all around New Jersey. In addition to doing that, I work for the New York City Health and Hospitals Corporation, as well as working as a field organizer for, and I always smile when I say his name because I always get a lot of reaction from any time I say his name. But I very proudly worked for former Congressman Anthony Weiner and his mayoral campaign. I think loyalty goes a long way in the Democratic Party. And I very proudly stood by him during that campaign because I thought he would have been the best mayor of New York City. Obviously, other people thought otherwise, but I very proudly stood by him. Moved to Florida about 2 years ago, shortly after the verdict in the Trayvon Martin case. I was very appalled that it seems that in the state of Florida, there's a gun law, of course, we know, stand your ground, which you can legally get away, evidently, with murdering a black child in the state of Florida. That affected me so deeply that I decided that I would come here and create the change that I think needs to be implemented in the state of Florida. So in doing so, I started working as a region lead to the Millennial Council of Super PAC called Ready for Hillary. Obviously, somebody got the message, and now she's running for president. So now that I've kind of spread my own wings, I just last month filed to run for office myself in Largo. Don't get it confused with Key Largo, but Largo in Pinellas County, St. Petersburg, Clearwater area. And in doing so, I actually am the first openly HIV positive person to ever file to run for office in the state of Florida. And next November, I will be the first openly HIV positive person to hold office in the state of Florida. I'll be one of 5 in the entire country. It's really fascinating. But, going to HIV, going into all of this, it is a major issue of concern. AIDS does not discriminate. Truly, it really doesn't. Here in the state of Florida, we make the news often, for things that we should not be proud of, like stand your ground. And unfortunately, there are a lot of issues that are considered maybe a little bit taboo or that we'd like to sweep under the rug that we don't necessarily want to talk about. And sex education and domestic violence and guns are quite a few of those issues, especially sex education and HIV/AIDS. In the state of Florida, we rank number 1. It's shameful, and we do nothing about it. We are number 1 in the entire country for teenagers being infected and transmitting HIV. We are number 2 in the entire country for pediatric AIDS cases, that's babies being born with HIV, and this is something that could affect each and every single one of you in this room, and I don't mean to say it to scare it, but it's just a statistic from the Center for Disease Control from last year, that people over the age of 55, Florida is number 1 in the entire country for HIV infection. So much so that there was even an article written on Time magazine just some years ago about how this is a disease that is rampant in, but where else? The villages. The city of the village. They're really, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to do a lot of things. But, it's interesting because in the villages, that city alone, it ranks number 1 for syphilis infection in the entire country. I tell people all the time, I was in Palm Beach County just last weekend talking. Some woman came up to me privately, bless her heart, she was 72 years old. She told me that just this year she's had 3 boyfriends. Lucky girl, lucky girl. Yeah, right? And she said that she hasn't. Yeah, I love it. I told her, I said, I admire that. I hope when I'm 72, I'm as limber as you. And she and I were talking, and she said, I haven't always been safe. Do you think I should go and get tested? And as I said before I started this conversation today, that AIDS does not discriminate. I once thought, of course, when I was that little 16-year-old boy in the Southern Baptist part of the state of Ohio growing up, that AIDS would not affect me. It was not on my mind. Just as the same thing with so many teenage girls. We hear all the time that are, unwarranted teenage pregnancies, and whether they follow through with that, decide to have that child, or whether they decide to terminate that pregnancy. This is an issue that can affect each and every single one of us in this room. And it's something that is very concerning for me, as I hope that we are going to truly reach a time in our nation's history, in global history, when we have an AIDS-free world. In doing so, I travel all over the country, and I've traveled internationally as well. Last year, I keynoted 2 AIDS conferences, one in Amsterdam, Netherlands, and another in Paris, France. And I started writing a book. If you Google me, I've done a lot of work in HIV/AIDS. And I started writing a book because I think that my story is very unique, but it's all too common. The more and more I travel around and I speak to so many people. I'm writing a book right now called A Man for All Seasons, Why Equal Opportunity and Inclusive Government Can Solve the World's Greatest Problems. That's a really long title. But I'm really, in depth, taking a look at, how we have the issues that we have now, and if we only worked together, sat down around the dinner table with people who are not always going to agree with us, how we can actually come to common ground and we can work together on any issue, especially combating HIV/AIDS and trying to reach an AIDS-free generation by 2050. And we can, but we have to start talking about it and we have to work together. So I want to read an excerpt from my book today, A Man for All Seasons, where I'm talking about being that little 16-year-old boy in the state of Ohio and finding out that I was HIV positive. So here you are. My junior year of high school was one I could neither have predicted nor seen coming, even if directly ahead. My junior year had gone great so far. I had just finished up summer stock. I was in the process of finishing up productions of the Laramie Project and Disney's Beauty and the Beast, all while taking an overwhelming amount of classes in the arts inside and outside of school. One of the classes that I was able to take my junior year of high school was a health class during my first semester, of which had a focus on sex education and the dangers of unprotected sex. While in class, there was a woman from the local health department who came as a guest speaker to talk about the dangers of unprotected sex, unwarranted teenage pregnancy, and HIV/AIDS. After class one day, I went to her and asked her for her guidance and advice, as I had been sexually active at this point with, mind you, only three people, and I contracted HIV. It only takes once. Only one time, one person, but only 3. 16, I made a very bad decision, and it affected my life forever, always. So I had complained to her about a cold sore that I had, specifically that week, and she told me that I should think about going and getting tested. So I went. On December 23rd, talk about a Christmas present right there. On December 23rd, 2008, I went to the local Canton City Health Department with my classmate, Ashley Taylor, and her mother, Lynn. After signing in and taking a number and waiting in a room full of other individuals who I thought that were there for the same reasons that I had been, my number was finally called. I traveled down a long hallway with a nurse while Lynn and Ashley were patiently awaiting my return in the health clinic. While walking, I immediately thought of an episode of Sex and the City. Has anyone here ever seen it? Yes?
Yes.
Of course, but who else am I going to refer to? The woman who has more sex than probably all of us in this room? Samantha Jones. Samantha Jones had gone for an HIV/AIDS test. Petrified to learn that she might be HIV positive, Samantha actually collapsed upon receiving her results. Of course, she turned out, she was very fortunate, she was not HIV positive. I might have been blonde at the time, still am today, a dancer, and at 17, but I couldn't imagine having as much sex as Samantha Jones. So I thought that I had nothing to worry about. I sat down with the nurse, I put out my arm, and I made myself available to any and all STD tests that I was told that I should receive after discussing my past sexual partners, mind you, only 3 of them, which included an HIV/AIDS test. I returned to the lobby, and about 40 minutes later, I was called back into the same room I had been tested in. The young nurse, who was once energetic and had been playfully joking with me, was no longer the nurse that I had just met. She was very mellow. She was extremely nervous, and I could tell that something was on her mind. She sat me down and she went through my test results. One by one, she told me I was negative. I was so relieved, even though the last result that she had to tell me was my HIV test result. But before she even got to that test result, I actually started to put on my winter jacket. Because at 17 years old and only 3 sexual partners, I knew that I had nothing to worry about. This, of course, became a defining moment in my life. I learned that just because you are young, you are not invincible. You should sit back down, she said. So I sat back down in my winter jacket, and she told me that there was an issue with my HIV/AIDS test. The room became deafening and cold. I felt as if everything around me were about to cave in. She then told me that you tested preliminary positive for HIV, and that they were going to need another blood sample from me to send off to Columbus, Ohio, and I would know an official diagnosis in 2 weeks' time. Shocked, I just started to laugh and told her to stop trying to scare me. She then explained to me that she had just started her job the week before, and that this was the first time that she ever had to deliver a positive diagnosis to another individual. In this moment, I realized that she was not joking, and that my life, of course, had forever changed. I immediately asked her, what does preliminary positive even mean? She responded, it means that HIV antibodies have shown up in your blood sample taken while being tested, and that they would need another blood sample from me to send off for further testing. I joked with friends, of course, that this was the moment that I definitely learned not to be afraid of needles. I put my arm back out and I told her to do whatever she needed to do. Upon receiving her second blood sample from me, I looked at my arm, and this was the moment that I began to cry. She looked at me and told me that everything was going to be okay. I immediately responded to her and asked what the likelihood of me not actually being HIV positive was. She responded that it's very rare that this would ever show up in a preliminary test result, and that I not actually be HIV positive. One Band-Aid later, and of course, but a knock at the door, I met Joy Dugan, the nurse who tried to explain to me what had just happened. I followed her into another room, and she sat me down and tried to explain in depth to me what had just happened and how my life was going to forever change. She then gave me a pamphlet with Magic Johnson on the front, a former NBA basketball player who had become HIV positive. And of course, me being the little gay man that I was at 17 years old, I thought, who's Magic Johnson? I know who Barbra Streisand and Judy Garland are, but who's Magic Johnson? What's the basketball? Of course, then she just went ahead and she looked at me and she told me that I know that you are going to be okay. There's something about you. You are going to help people one day. I know it. She then left the room, and I went to the lobby to retrieve Ashley and Lynn. But upon their return, they could tell that something, of course, had gone horribly wrong. Lynn and Ashley, of course, became everything that I needed in that moment, and everything which I was desperate for. They had shown me such compassion, love, and support. Lynn threw her arms around me and let me know that it was okay to cry. I broke down, I buried my head into her chest, and I just sunk into her soul. I cried, of course, not for myself, but I cried for my mother and for my family. On the drive home, everything began to become immediately clear, and the reality of what had just happened began to set in. My life had forever changed, and whether or not I had liked it or even understood it, that I needed to grow up and be an adult about the situation. I began to reflect on my life and all the things that I had thought once mattered. I looked at the snow, of course, on the trees and the decoration of Christmas lights around Canton, Ohio. You know, being born and raised in Ohio for the first 19 years of my life, I learned to resent an Ohio winter and the lake effect snow that we often received in the northeastern part of Ohio. But today was actually different. The snow was glowing. The way it sparkled in the sun as it began to melt, and the way that, of course, the Christmas lights around town had brought so much joy to the children and the families who had put them up. Lynn and Ashley drove me home, where Ashley and I would go upstairs to my room while Lynn would begin to tell my mother what had actually just happened. But while in my room, I had thought of a story my mother had told me while growing up. My mother, who has been trained to take care of people who are MRDD, disabled or elderly, very proud of her, she still does that to this day, also had her own HIV/AIDS story. When I was younger, my mother had been stuck in traffic, ironically, in downtown Canton, Ohio, right by the health department. It was raining, and there was an accident. A young woman had hit an African American woman crossing the street in the rain. Worried if someone were physically